Probably write an entire instruction manual now. Always start top 5th rung, avoid the 12th from the left, it scratches the siding. When reaching the balcony, climb an extra 6 rungs to the railing. Avoid the 2nd from the right, it has a fracture. If you press the railing inward, it creaks. Edward would always be waiting for me when I knocked on the door, and he'd always pull my hood off my head once I was in the room. For some reason he didn't like it. He'd eat in the middle of his bed, just like before, and I'd watch him eat, basking in his every moan and hum. I'd act like I was listening to music, but I'd really have one earbud out just so I could hear him better. A few days, we weren't really tired enough to go straight to bed. Well, he wasn't tired enough. I'd always be buzzing with impatience to get into the bed with him, no matter if I was tired or not. But regardless of my impatience, I still liked his company, and I loved talking to him. So I'd get one of his books and try reading it while he sketched. I never got far along in the book before we fell into an easy conversation. I'd try to wait until he was tired enough to go to sleep, but there were a couple times I couldn't wait anymore, and I'd close my book to indicate I was ready. He didn't seem to mind cutting his sketching short. He let me use his bathroom to brush my teeth and hair and wash my face. I couldn't bear the horror of going to bed next to Edward with bad breath. He never took a shower while I was there, so I assumed he was a morning showerer like me, but he did spend a small amount of time in the bathroom while I waited in bed for him. We never changed out of our school clothes. It was slightly uncomfortable, sleeping in jeans and a hoodie, but I felt too awkward to bring the subject up. And because we were fully clothed and never got cold, we never slept under the blankets. The whole thing was intimate, yet strangely businesslike. But I couldn't bring myself to care. I was taking what I could get. And it was an awful lot. Once the light was off, Edward wouldn't hesitate to turn toward me and scoop me up. I love it. I lived for it. My head automatically went straight to its spot on his chest. Every night he would hold me progressively tighter, and being in the safety of his arms would always relax me. He loved it when I stroked his hair. He would always sigh into mine when I did it. And once I started humming his song, he would doze off quickly. I would stay up a little afterwards, just enjoying the moment and breathing him and pressing myself so close to him that our legs would get tangled up. It was always dreamless, and I'd wake up to that stupid freaking alarm clock. I'd hold him tighter, willing him not to pull away from me, but he always did. It was okay though, because I always told myself we could do it again in 17 hours. Not that I was counting or anything. I'd run to the bathroom as fast I could. My hair was always a mess. I think Edward really liked nuzzling his face into it. Which, of course, I didn't mind one bit. I'd be sure to pack all of my things up before leaving him his bag of cookies on the bedside table. I'd always glare a dagger or two at the alarm clock as I was doing it. I always got home and showered before Esme woke up, and usually had breakfast made for both her and Alice by the time they came into the kitchen. With the exception of a certain alarm clock, I found that I was a morning person. Who knew? School usually soured my mood infinitesimally. I was so alert that everyone's presence seemed to invade my calm. I worked harder than ever to maintain my numb state. I figured it was working though, because I didn't have any more breakdowns. Edward still ignored me, but I was never expecting any different. He comforted me that day after my breakdown, and broke the rules. It meant the world to me, but I didn't expect anything else out of it. By the time I see him in the quad, I only have 12 more hours to go. Again, not that I'm counting or anything. He always had the same bored look on his face, sparing the occasional glare at someone who walked too closely to him. And lunch was always tense. Poor Emmett never tried talking to me again after I apologized on Friday, the day after the handshaking incident. And as thus, I kept all my attention on my book and cookies. Though I'd spare myself a glance or two at Edward across the room, where he was always eating the cookies I left him that morning. It always made me smile. and I didn't mind one bit when he ignored me in biology. I could smell him from my seat, and it always soothed my nerves. Alice and I would go home and hang out after school. She would beg and plead with me to let her dress me up, and I would vehemently refuse. When she'd get pouty, all I'd have to do is make a comment on what Jasper was wearing that day. Then I'd spend hours listening about him on her bed. It was something that made me feel like a normal girl. The only downfall being I couldn't get her back by droning on about Edward. I wasn't ignoring my feelings for Edward. I knew I liked him as more than a friend, that I'd love for him to see me that way too. But it was obvious to me that it wasn't entirely like that for him. And I was nowhere near ready to put our whole arrangement on the line by making those feelings known. One part of me was hoping that eventually he would come to see me as more than just a friend, and a means to an end. And another, larger part of me was feeling selfish for wanting more, when I was already getting so much, as it was. It was Friday again, and I was in gym, loving the fact it was my last class of the weekend. We had to dress out in those ugly gym uniforms, but the teacher let me keep my hoodie on. We were playing basketball, and thankfully the boys and girls teams were split up, so I wasn't in risk of being touched. Unfortunately, my good mood didn't last long because Jessica Stanley was on my team. She was 2 seats down from me on the bleachers, her disgustingly curly hair all over the place, and she was leaning into Samantha, who sat beside her as they both crudely smacked on bubblegum. Jessica and Samantha were discussing their conquests, while the girl teams were on the bleachers waiting for the guys to finish their game. And I wrestled and struggled not to listen to them and what they were saying. I was trying to focus on anything else, the texture of the basketball I was holding, the absurdity of wearing my hoodie sweater with gym shorts, the squeaks on the shiny wooden floor as the guys across the room skirmished for control over their ball. I even tried to discreetly put my hands over my ears. I was wishing I had my own iPod, and then distracting myself with ways I would hint to Alice to buy me one. But once his name was said, my mind automatically reacted against my will, and everything else around me dissolved except the sound of her high, annoyingly nasal voice. "Edward Cullen," Jessica said with a nod. I had no clue what was said before that, and I had no chance of blocking her out now.
"Definitely best lay ever. Hands down. No competition."
My vision turned red and my blood boiled. I figured they had sex, but this was the first time I had any direct confirmation of it. Her ugly hair was just inches from my foot, below me on the bleacher. I fantasized about lifting it just so, and kicking the crap out of her. Samantha erupted into a fit of giggles.
"Yeah, I totally should have known you'd say Cullen. Even if it was a backseat fuck."
She shook her head in disapproval while Jessica just shrugged. Now I had 2 conflicting emotions. I was beyond relieved that it wasn't in his bed. The same bed we slept together, and knowing something like that would just completely ruin the sanctuary for me, but now I had even more details that I didn't want to know. Now I had a visual in my head, and I didn't want it. They both leaned back into the bleachers and placed their feet on the seats in front of them.
"So,
Jess," Samantha began in scandalous voice,
give me the skinny on Cullen."
She smirked. I held my breath and fought with myself further to block out that annoying voice. Ugly green shorts, funny mask at freakishly shiny floor.
"Fucking fantastic, assert,"
Jessica smacked and twirled a lock of her hair. I shook my head and tried to concentrate more on shielding myself, clenching my hands around the basketball I was holding. Deflated gym equipment, underfunded Washington school system, grilled chicken pitas with vegetables. And, sweet fucking Christ, those hands, she breathed dreamily. I ground my teeth, bore down on the ball fiercely, and tried harder to distance my mind. Pythagorean theorem, theory of relativity: for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Not to mention, he's the quiet type, so of course, he liked talking dirty. She snickered, blowing a bubble. I clenched my eyes closed and shook my head frantically, pressing my fingertips into the ball so hard they hurt, and willed myself not to hear her voice. Bloody Newton's gold carpet green eyes. Jessica licked her lips.